And now we have Dr. Tony McSherry, and his talk is Signs of Love in the Wasteland, Psychotherapy as an Eventual. Over to you.
Thank you. So it's been difficult to write this talk. I'll just go straight into it. Mainly difficult because each time I try to point out something in society that I don't like, I see it reflected in myself. It's like being in a distorted hall of mirrors in a way, trying to say anything or separate society out from the individual or this speaking being. So I presume we must all be like this. Everyone has a subjectivity where aspects they have turned away from or cannot see or choose not to in a disavowal. Full objectivity is always impossible. Our myriad of subjectivities results in an ethics that is something like a list of statements, which tries to accommodate something like, no, you can't say that, I see it this way. So everyone gets included, and the list grows ever longer in our liberal democratic societies. So we can see what the philosopher Alain Badiou means when he says ethics is a matter of opinions now, dominated by a mix of a Kantian moral imperative and a theological or mystical notion of alterity. Our ethics is splintered into a myriad of postmodern surfaces, reflecting individual ways of making sense of the world, or making sense of each other. Although capitalism still holds sway for me as the grand narrative that perhaps everyone ignores, then there is power. Cutting across all the ethical red tape, real power bends the law to suit its own agenda. So war and all manner of horror is justified to serve the needs or opinions of that power. The society with the greatest power today is, of course, the United States. But the British and Western European powers have also dominated. And you could argue that between the lot of them, they are responsible for most of the horrors of human conflict in the world today. Although a young person pointed out to me recently that if it hadn't been them, then it would have been somebody else doing it. It's tempting to agree, because there is something about human nature that wants too much, or as Lacan might put it, there is an excess in the subject that overflows. In such a situation, what are therapies for? Are therapies just there to teach you how to do well in the situation? We have to know something crucial about our own selves, perhaps, to answer this question. Something like, well, why am I a therapist? What the hell am I doing as a therapist? So you could say, what excess drives you in your work as a therapist? It seems obvious that we are living in a failing global society, and that the therapies are part of this, or even a symptom of it. It seems to me that I get paid to congruently show a thoughtful, loving attitude, which at its worst is perverted into a technical product. In a local town centre recently, I couldn't help but wonder what Lacan meant when he said that Marx invented the symptom. What I thought Lacan meant was that Marx first described the uprootedness of people in capitalism, and therefore first entered our way of living into language, making it properly exist for us for the first time. It's like someone who is being abused but is unaware of it and cannot symbolize it until it is brought to their attention in all its insidious and obvious ways, then becomes part of their language with the full force of all its effects. The mystical bonds that once made us feel important amongst others, for example, as children of God, as belonging to a tradition rooted in a place, and so on, are now broken more or less. The agenda is self-serving and does not look towards any ideal of the good. Accumulation is good, wealth is good, and so on. And this is what Badiou sarcastically calls the ethics of living well. What Marx noted almost 200 years ago is still true. The dominant reality in modernity is civil society, with its guiding principles of individualism and the rule of private interests. It has now gone global. For example, here's Žižek. If you want to talk about global capitalism, you have to include Congo, a country in disarray with thousands of drugged child warriors who are nevertheless, as such, fully integrated into the global system. The rare earth metals in our laptops that enable this online conference probably come from Congo. So should we just shut our laptops and all go home? We could add to that the powerful self-interest involved in Sudan, Palestine, Syria, and many more places of conflict. Instead of arms or ideology, what most therapists sell is a form of relationship. But this simple fact surely tells us there is something profoundly wrong with our society. And the warped paradox is that most of those relationships will be genuine. Love really is for sale. There are numerous workshops on how to set it up as a business even. Such a situation sometimes makes me feel a bit sick. We dress the relationship up with the word therapeutic as it sounds technical. Perhaps one of the reasons why therapies are sold as technical interventions or also philosophical ones is to avoid a confrontation with the nauseating feeling that love is being sold. What to do with this state of affairs then in a global society? Žižek would say to embrace it hopelessly with a certain courage. For him, the true courage is not to imagine an alternative. The dream of an alternative is a sign of theoretical cowardice. In short, the true courage is to admit that the light at the end of the tunnel is probably the headlight of another train. Coming from a more optimistic place, here is Badiou. The possibility of the impossible, which is exposed by every loving encounter, is the sole principle of an ethic of truths, against the ethics of living well, whose real content is the deciding of death. For Badiou, such a loving encounter is not something from an idealized Platonic world, but is an event that is a fragment of being, but which can only assert itself through the lasting fidelity of a subject. The subject is a person, that is, someone like you or me. The event comes through the person. For example, everything could be ripe for a social revolution, but if there is not a revolutionary subject, a person to convoke it, it will never happen. It's worth saying that for Badiou, an event can only happen in 4 fields of life. And he's put a lot of philosophy and thought into these 4 fields. He hasn't just taken them out of the sky. So the 4 fields are love, politics, art, and science. Romantic love is an example if it catches hold. Events in politics include the French Revolution and the October Revolution. Evil arises when the good of an event is distorted through a betrayal, delusion, or terror. He's quite specific here. Betrayal in love, for example, may happen through fatigue or temptation. Delusion is the case when an event is false, for example, the Nazi movement. Terror is when an event is forced as a total truth. For example, positivism in the psychologies, for example, and Stalinism. As a subject, how could an event be convoked in you right now listening? Badiou thinks there are only 4 ways. You become a faithful subject, or a reactive subject, an obscure subject, or you resurrect it, you resurrect something. Žižek, as only Žižek can, adds another 2, which are outright denial and total reinforcement. For example, here are the 6 responses to the Freud event. 1, fidelity. The example here is Lacan. 2, reactive normalization. The example is ego psychology or dynamic psychotherapy. 3, reactive denial, cognitivism, quite rampant in psychological therapies. 4, obscurantis mystification in a pseudo event. The example here for Žižek is Jung. 5, total reinforcement. The example is Reich or Freud or Marxism. And 6, resurrection, which are the various returns to Freud or rereadings of Freud, perhaps that we all engage in. So where would we place our own practices with respect to the Freud event? That's just a question that you don't have to answer, of course. So what kind of response to some events has captivated you and made you want to qualify as a therapist, or made you want to stay in this occupation? Was it through amorous love, politics, science, or art, or somewhere else? It might be helpful to locate your practice in Badiou's terms. You could ask yourself, what process of truth are you caught up in that means something to you, that you would not abandon to a servicing of goods? That is, a servicing of goods means the ethics that just helps you get on with life. This might help us understand what kind of therapists we are and how we engage with society from our own subjectivity. Crucially, Badiou's form of revolution also involves a withdrawal from the state, a subtraction, in his words, from the overall situation of society. This subtracted space appeals to me intuitively. It reminds me of my therapy room, for example. It seems clear that revolutionary therapy can only exist as something subtracted from the institutions of the state, yet it still needs to stay engaged also in some way. It seems reasonable to say then that a truth process linked to an event could happen in therapy, which cannot be seen as a product, being outside of those parameters of our current ethical norms. For example, you might find this when a client just wants to come and talk. They are making, sorry?
Just a couple of minutes.
All right, yeah, thanks. They are making of therapy what they want. There is no goal, no aim, and no outcome. And so it subtracts itself from the terror of positivism in psychology and the therapies. In thinking about all this, 2 things come to mind. Firstly, because of subjectivity, it seems that I am more likely to promote the barbaric society we are in if I get too carried away with it in trying to change it. That is, our society and ways of living seem so natural to us that we unwittingly promote them. For example, we might tend to promote the idea that real change is not possible, or distort some subjective truth of our own so that it becomes totalized or objectified into some terror for the client. Secondly, although the fragmented field of therapies may be a strength, there is no ethics of psychotherapy. Has Lacan not done us a great favor in defining the ethics of psychoanalysis? Do not give up on breaking through your own subjectivity, on how you have become enrolled in the Dednick symbolic order and its nightmarish repetition. Badiou encourages us to take that ethic of not giving up, but place it in the service of a subjective truth process that is our own, a subjective response of fidelity to an event. It is the subject who defines an ethical response to an event, which involves a process of truth. This frees us from the normative human resources version of ethics, without freeing us from the living engagement in a process of truth, of questioning. Questions, for example, is this thing I love false? Is this a betrayal of something true? Is this a terror in the name of some good? are continual questions we can ask ourselves as therapists, so that we return to ourselves and not some technical idea. And in Badiou's words, we can keep going, continue to be this someone, a human animal among others, which nevertheless finds itself seized and displaced by the evental process of a truth. Continue to be the active part of that subject of a truth you have happened to become. I can conclude there till I think time's up, is it?
It is, but if you want to finish
Yeah.
up.
Final conclusion. In conclusion, I think therapists should not be afraid to exist on the edges of our failing society, in the outer limits, which are also the inner limits of the good life, in subtracted spaces, but not to opt out either. We might just belong at that point of failure of the individual and of society, but not to prop up that failing society, rather to revolutionize it. Thank you.
Thank you. Does anybody have any questions or comments?
Tony, thanks very much for that. Brilliant. Thanks a lot. I was just thinking about this idea of being. I just find it harder and harder to subtract. When I think about just being a therapist, I think of all the obligations that you have as a sort of, you have to be a member of UKCP, you have to be a member of this, you have to, ascribe to the ethical position of the UKCP. There's so much, isn't it? And you just look on the UKCP website these days and it just feels like another product. I mean, that's just me. Other people think very differently, I'm sure. But, I just wonder, how do you even get away from it? It feels like it's just pervades everything, occupies every space, that there isn't a space that you can subtract to, apart from perhaps the therapeutic room. But
I think Badiou is talking about, but actually by subtracting yourself, it creates an effect, of some kind. So you can't subtract yourself totally. I don't think we can we? Because it's not possible.
Well, it could be possible by just not being a psychotherapist, and with the work, there's a place for it. Some action might happen.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, give up being a psychotherapist and become a revolutionary. Do something different. Or
the argument, aren't we just sort of allowing the pressure off the system? Whereas if we weren't there, the pressure might build up in a more. It might bring about change, but we stop change by being psychotherapists.
Because
smoothing it out.
Yeah.
I mean, that's why I like what you said, Tony, about sort of existing at this point of failure of both ourselves and of society. That can there be a sort of an existence on this point of failure where we stop knowing and where we're kind of the shaky ground is, I suppose, where Badiou would say the possibility arises from this place of not ducking out and not but kind of inhabiting the fault line.
Yeah, I think Badiou is a Marxist that sees the kind of communist project as having failed, but kind of he just accepts capitalism as the background of our lives, but hoping it will collapse by withdrawing from it in a way as much as possible. Like two suggestions I was going to say, which I didn't have time to read out, one was don't work for the NHS if you want to be a psychological therapist, because it's a positivistic organization. It promotes positivism right down all the way, right through, and maybe secondly, don't publish articles for these publishing houses that make a lot of money out of selling them to different university libraries. Why not publish them for free for students to read? Why not do that? Could we do that? How does that grab you, Del?
Well, it's the same as the first question, really. It's the there are people who work as psychotherapists and don't work through a professional body, but it's pretty difficult, you know. People want to read on counselling directory. I mean, the fact that it might be somebody there who's had no therapy and at best on a 1 day a week course for 2 years. Yeah.
Yeah. I know. Yeah.
You know, and it's the same, but it's about legitimization. Who legitimizes professionalization? Who legitimizes knowledge? And so legitimization of knowledge through the, you know, the apparently refereed journals and things like this. So it's there because people are already in our culture trained to only trust what the forces and culture allow, you know, and allow a little bit, you know, so they allow, you know, we talked about as parts of psychology, but in psychology, you're allowed to teach a little bit of something called critical psychology, which of course assumes that the rest of psychology isn't critical, but you're allowed to just do a little bit of it. So there's that sort of little bits to allow. They're not
don't actually let it in, like don't let it actually work. Yeah.
So people aren't going to automatically go for a site that hasn't got that status within our culture. It's being prescribed that, oh, this is legitimate knowledge. This is a legitimate psychotherapy.
Yeah. I think that's why Žižek is saying something like it's kind of hopeless, but I'm not sure if I'm misunderstanding him, because I think he thinks there is a lot of hope in subtracting from the state while still staying engaged in it.
Radical dialectics, you know. So I think it's not just that there's. I love that thing you said, Tony, about hope is the light at the end of the tunnel was a train going in the other direction. I thought it was superb.
That's not me. That's Žižek.
Yeah, but he does. I think Žižek does sort of seem to think there's some symbolization can take place through that radical dialectics that doesn't assume that we're going to somehow incorporate in a Hegelian sense something into something good eventually. Yeah. You know, but overall it's going to be good. It hasn't been good. It's been horrendous, and it will continue. And that's our past, our present, and our future.
That's why I like Badiou in the sense that he's saying, respond to this with your own subjectivity. You know, get involved in it, engage yourself properly in a way. You know, don't give up on it. You know, fail better next time. I think one of his favorite writers is Beckett. You know.